Jim Cummings is back with his second movie, and after the first one I was excited. Because that one, Thunder Road, came out of nowhere for me and ended up being one of my favorites that year. It was just a perfect balance of hilarious deadpan comedy and genuinely touching moments. And that's a very difficult thing to pull off, weaving a compelling story into a ridiculous comedy. And making both parts work, because they require very different tones to really pack a punch. But he somehow managed to do it, so I knew he was a very capable filmmaker. Oh, and by the way, he writes, directs, and stars in these movies, juggling 3 things at once, making it even more impressive. But what about his second outing? Did he pull off yet another surprise? Well, in a way, yeah, because this one feels very different from the previous one. It's kind of a horror comedy with, I would say, a heavier emphasis on the comedy. I wouldn't say it had a lot of genuinely scary moments, because usually even those contained hints of humor. But the general idea here is that a brutal murder happens in this sleepy little ski town. And we follow the local sheriff's office as they get in way over their heads trying to deal with the situation. And Jim once again plays a cop with a daughter, so pulling from the same well as the last movie in that regard. But it worked last time and it works here too, because I thoroughly enjoyed his performance in this. Because his delivery and the way he plays these characters is just perfect. I mean, as the writer-director, he obviously knows what he wants out of the performance and he knows how to pull it off too. So no complaints there. In fact, I liked the rest of the cast in this too. Everyone just did a great job. And the comedy is by far the strongest element here. It's what carries the movie. However, it does have some heart too and a bit of an emotional core, mainly having to do with the daughter. But unfortunately that does take a bit of a backseat in this one and isn't nearly as impactful as in Thunder Road. So the balance between the two aspects isn't quite as good, but it's still there and it works. And as a whole too, I think the movie does work. In fact, I really enjoyed it. But again, mostly because of the humor, because when this thing fires on all cylinders, it's hilarious. And it's mostly deadpan, pretty dark humor, so don't expect a whole lot of slapstick or straight up jokes from this. And I think the general story here worked too. It did feel kinda bare bones, but it worked. I didn't really have a whole lot of issues with it, but it did sort of feel just like scaffolding. Something to hold it all together and drive the movie forward, while the focus was more on the characters and their individual little arcs. And I don't mind that approach at all. In fact, I love how they wrapped it all up too. It felt like it was poking fun at how ridiculous the whole idea was and how bad movies sometimes deal with twists and big reveals. Now with that being said, I don't just have praise for this, because for a movie this short, it took a while to get going. Unlike Thunder Road that had me hooked from the very opening scene, this one definitely didn't, and I was almost starting to get worried there. Because it just didn't grab me and really get me fully to go with it until a fair bit into it. And I feel like it was mostly because of the lack of really funny moments early on. It did have some funny stuff there, but it was mostly just amusing, and amusing I can get from almost any comedy. And even once it really got going and started getting hilarious, it wasn't quite as consistently funny as I would have hoped. So as a result, I didn't quite love this one. It was a bit bumpy, but I still liked it a lot and thought it was really very unique and funny too. Mainly because of the way Cummings just approaches things in general. From the main premise to the characters, the humor and the editing too. Because he did some very creative cuts in this that just sort of came out of nowhere. It just jumped from one thing to the next, and it might be days or weeks later. It didn't quite specify ever. And I liked that too. It felt like a breath of fresh air. I don't see editing like that very often. So yeah, as a whole, I really like this one, and I'm looking forward to seeing what Cummings comes up with next. And as a result, I'm gonna have to give this one a low 8. Boop. However, would I recommend this? Sure, if you're into a bit darker comedy, go for it. Otherwise, I don't know, maybe skip it or don't. After all, I'm not your dad. But hey, what are your thoughts on this? Have you seen it? Did you like it? Let me know. And if you enjoyed the video, maybe give it a thumbs up or sub to the channel, because that would be fantastic.